Patsy was never harmless. That is the whole point of his character. He looks harmless because he is quiet, older, unimpressive, and usually pushed into the background. He does not carry himself like Richie. He does not explode like Ralph. He does not demand respect like Feach. He does not have Christopher's emotional chaos or Paulie's loud insecurity. Patsy is the kind of man Tony can underestimate because he does not advertise his anger. But Patsy had one of the strongest reasons in the entire crew to hate Tony. His twin brother Philly was whacked after Tony became boss in practice. Philly was not some distant associate. He was Patsy's twin. That matters because it makes the murder feel almost personal in a way normal mafia violence does not. Patsy loses the person who looks like him, shares blood with him, and represents part of his own identity. Then he's expected to keep showing up, keep earning, keep nodding, and keep acting like the man behind it. All is still his boss. That is the first reason Tony's trust in Patsy is so strange. In a cleaner story, Patsy would either take revenge or Tony would remove him as a future threat. But The Sopranos is not clean like that. It understands how organized crime often works in a much uglier way. People do not always settle betrayal with one final act. Sometimes they absorb it. Sometimes they live beside it. Sometimes they sit across from the man they hate because the alternative is death, prison, poverty, or exile. Patsy's grief does not vanish. It just gets buried under routine. Early on, Patsy clearly cannot handle what happened. He drinks, goes near Tony's house, watches from the outside, and for a moment, he looks like a man who might cross the line. That moment is important because it shows that Patsy is not simply weak. He is capable of revenge in his mind. He can imagine it. He can bring himself close to it. He can stand near Tony's home with the kind of anger that could become violence. But he does not do it. That is the key. Patsy reaches the edge of revenge, and then he steps back. Not because he forgives Tony, not because he suddenly accepts Philly's death. He steps back because he understands the cost. He knows what Tony is. He knows what would happen if he missed, if he hesitated, if anyone found out, or even if he succeeded. Killing Tony would not bring Philly back. It would destroy Patsy, his family, and probably anyone close to him. So Patsy makes the decision most people in that world make when they are too smart to be reckless and too trapped to be free. He swallows it. That is why Tony can use him again. Tony's trust in Patsy is not emotional trust, it is mafia trust. That means Tony is not asking whether Patsy is pure in his heart. He is asking whether Patsy can function inside the structure. Can he show up? Can he follow orders? Can he keep his anger private? Can he make money? Can he do ugly work without making it about himself? Patsy proves that he can. One of the biggest signs is when Tony sends Patsy to deal with Gloria. That job is not random. Tony needs someone who can deliver a threat without turning it into a circus. He cannot send Christopher because Christopher might make it emotional or sloppy. He cannot send Paulie because Paulie enjoys performance too much. He needs someone quiet, controlled, and cold. That is Patsy. The scene works because Patsy does not need to raise his voice to be dangerous. He does not have to act like a monster. He simply explains the reality of what will happen if Gloria keeps pushing. That moment tells us why Tony keeps him around. Patsy is not flashy, but he is effective. He can walk into a civilian space, apply pressure, and leave without dragging the whole crew into unnecessary drama. Tony values that more than loyalty speeches. By this point, Patsy has made himself useful in a very specific way. He is not a big earner like Ralph. He is not a beloved nephew like Christopher. He is not an old friend like Silvio. But he is stable, he is competent, he understands the rules. In Tony's world, that can be enough. And Tony also has another reason to trust him again. Patsy does not have a real power base. That matters a lot. Tony is always watching for men who can challenge him. Richie has old school respect and resentment. Ralph has money and influence. Feach has reputation. Christopher has blood connection and entitlement. Vito has earning power. Even Paulie has history and survival instinct. Patsy does not have that kind of force behind him. He is respected enough to be included, but not strong enough to lead a rebellion. He is smart enough to be useful, but not magnetic enough to gather people around him. He is bitter, but not openly ambitious. From Tony's point of view, that makes him manageable. Patsy may hate him, but hatred without leverage is something Tony believes he can live with. This is where Tony's thinking becomes very practical. He does not need every man under him to love him. He just needs them to fear the consequences of acting against him. Patsy has already shown that fear works on him. He had his chance to become reckless, and he backed away. To Tony, that kind of restraint can look like obedience. But there is a darker part, too. Tony probably does not fully understand the depth of Patsy's resentment. He knows Patsy lost his brother. He knows there was pain there. But Tony often assumes people will eventually adapt to whatever damage he causes. He has a talent for turning other people's suffering into background noise. Once enough time passes, Tony treats the wound as if it has become old business. That is one of Tony's biggest flaws as boss. He thinks time equals control. With Patsy, time does create a kind of surface peace. Patsy keeps working, he keeps earning, he does not make a public problem, he does not force Tony's hand, so Tony reads the situation through the only lens he trusts, behavior. Patsy behaves like a loyal soldier, so Tony treats him like one. But that does not mean the wound is gone. Patsy's anger becomes quieter, which actually makes it more dangerous. Loud enemies are easier for Tony to understand. Richie announces his resentment with every look. Ralph cannot hide his contempt for long. Feach comes back from prison and immediately feels like a problem. These men put their threat on display, so Tony reacts. Patsy does the opposite. He disappears into the furniture. That is why he survives. He does not challenge Tony's ego directly. He does not embarrass him in front of the crew. He does not make Tony feel cornered. Tony can tolerate resentment as long as it does not become disrespect. Patsy understands this perfectly. He knows that in Tony's world, open emotion gets you noticed, and being noticed for the wrong reason can get you killed. So Patsy becomes the kind of man Tony can convince himself is no longer a threat. Then the family connection with Meadow changes everything. When Patsy's son Patrick starts getting serious with Meadow, Patsy is no longer just a soldier with an old grievance. He becomes connected to Tony's actual family. This is where the situation becomes deeply ironic. Tony once helped create the pain that sits inside Patsy's house, and now their children might join the two families together. For Tony, this probably makes Patsy seem safer. If Meadow is connected to Patrick, then Patsy has more to lose. He is no longer just a man with a dead brother. He is a father whose son is close to the boss's daughter. Revenge becomes even more complicated. Betrayal would not just be business, it would poison both families. Tony sees family ties as a form of insurance. He thinks relationships create obligation. He thinks proximity to his house makes people more loyal, or at least more careful. And in some ways, he is right. Patsy would have to think twice about anything that could damage Patrick's future, Meadow's future, or the comfortable position his family may gain through that connection. But the show also lets us feel how unstable that logic is. Because family ties do not erase history, they can also deepen resentment. Patsy may be sitting at dinners, talking politely, acting like everything is normal, while still carrying the knowledge that Tony's rise helped put his twin brother on the ground. The marriage connection does not cleanse that, it only makes the silence more uncomfortable. That is the genius of Patsy's role near the end. He becomes closer to Tony's family without ever becoming emotionally close to Tony. There is a difference. Tony may see the connection as trust. Patsy may see it as survival, opportunity, or simply the strange path his son has chosen. And that brings us to the real answer. Tony decided to trust Patsy again because Patsy gave him no immediate reason not to. That sounds simple, but in Tony's world, it is everything. Tony does not have the luxury of perfect loyalty. His entire crew is filled with men who complain, scheme, gossip, hide money, cheat each other, and resent him. If Tony removed every person who had a reason to hate him, he would have almost no one left, so he makes choices based on risk. Patsy's risk becomes acceptable. He is useful. He is quiet. He is not building a faction. He is not causing open problems. He does not make Tony feel challenged. He has a family stake in keeping the peace. He has already shown he can bury his anger and keep operating. For Tony, that is enough. But the important thing is that Tony never truly solves the Patsy problem. He only manages it. That is very different. Tony's leadership often works this way. He does not heal wounds. He pressures people until they stop bleeding in public. He does not create loyalty. He creates dependence, fear, routine, and habit. Then he mistakes those things for trust. Patsy is one of the clearest examples of that. On paper, Patsy should never be fully safe. His brother was taken from him. He knows the business well enough to understand how these decisions happen. He is not stupid. He is not naive. He knows Tony's world. Yet he stays, because staying is the only realistic way to protect what he still has. That makes Patsy both weak and strong in a very Sopranos way. Weak because he accepts humiliation and keeps serving the man connected to his brother's death. Strong because he has the discipline to survive it. Many men in the show die because they cannot control their pride. Patsy lives because he can. Tony trusts that discipline. He trusts Patsy's fear. He trusts his self-interest. He trusts his routine. He trusts that Patsy is too practical to throw his life away for revenge. And for a long time, Tony may be right. But the question hanging over Patsy is whether buried anger stays buried forever. The final season leaves that feeling in the air. Patsy survives the war with New York. His son is tied to Meadow. He remains one of the few men still standing while Tony's world has been hollowed out. By the end, Patsy is not just some background soldier anymore. He is positioned closer to Tony's family than almost anyone else. That makes Tony's trust look less like wisdom and more like necessity. Tony does not trust Patsy because the past is settled. He trusts him because the past has become inconvenient to keep addressing. That is how Tony handles a lot of moral damage. He moves forward and expects everyone else to move with him. If they do not, they become a problem. If they do, he calls it loyalty. Patsy understood the assignment better than most. He did not forgive, he adjusted, he did not forget, he behaved. He did not become Tony's friend. He became someone Tony could use, and that is why Tony trusted him again. Not because Patsy was clean, because Patsy was controlled.